I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning back into the podcast built to decolonize classical music. I'm really excited and really honored to share with you today's feature of David Harrington from the Kronos Quartet, the legendary Kronos Quartet. This is a group that's been around for over 50 years, and it serves as a really great example of what it can look like for so-called classical infrastructures to platform and explore a different way of being and a different way of doing when it comes to music. The group has had many different members over the years, and David has been there since the beginning as a founder. So I'm really honored again to chat with him today, or to share with you my chat with him today. In response to the 250th anniversary of America, the Kronos Quartet recently embarked on a project called 3 Bones, which highlights musical perspectives of Native, immigrant, and Black communities and cultures across the United States. This includes new works by Wu Man, who's been on the show, works by Laura Ortman, Tanya Tagaq, Raven Chacon, who's a friend of the show, and works that explore Gullah traditions and ancestral connections between Gullah music and the motherland. So we talk about this and some of the broader work of the Kronos Quartet. Since there aren't yet any recordings of this 3 Bones performance, these 3 panels, we're going to get into my chat with David Harrington with an excerpt from an album of theirs called Floodplain. This was actually my introduction to Kronos a decade ago, back when I was working at WUOT in Knoxville. And I think it's a great way to get a sample of what their work sounds like. This is called Ya Habibi Ta'ala, music by Midat Asim, arranged by Osvaldo Gullah, performed by Jamie Papish with the Kronos Quartet. Hope you enjoy my chat with David.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you encountered Floodplain. And Kronos has been involved with music from many places for a long time before that. And as a matter of fact, Pieces of Africa, which came out in 1992, established something that I had wanted to bring into our music ever since I was in high school, before there was Kronos. And that's because in our my high school music room, we had some albums from various places throughout Africa. And I noticed a feeling and a sound and an approach that was totally absent from any string quartet music that I knew or played at that point. And I vowed one day my violin was going to sound as close to some of the things I was hearing as a 16 or 17-year-old kid as possible. And that took until 1992. And as a matter of fact, right today, we could make another Pieces of Africa album that would be entirely different and have a lot more sonic panorama, I would say. And after that, then there was some other albums, such as working with Astor Piazzolla on 5 Tango Sensations. And then there was Nuevo that followed sonically a trip that I took my family on to Mexico in 1995. And it came out, I think, in 2002. So there are a lot of things that predated Floodplain. And in concert, we've done all kinds of wonderful collaborations and have learned about the world of music and sound through our work with for example, Wu Man, the great pipa player, the trio de Cali from Central Africa, Western Central Africa, and just to name a few, and then Alim Kasimov from Armenia. And, the world of music is so fabulous. And it's like, for me, it's just getting better every day. I mean, some people say the world is dissolving down a dirty drain of disgust, which is true, but in some ways, but also musicians and music are finding connections and beauty in so many places. And so anyway, I don't know if I'm answering your question or
definitely,
just...
definitely. And it is really almost humbling for me to think about the path that led to Floodplain, much less everything that's happened since then. With your engagement of so many different musics and types of musicking over the years, how do you engage the phrase classical music? Is this a phrase that you even use?
No. Not specifically, because I mean, I've encountered that phrase in the music, let's say, of Vietnam. There is a classic music in Vietnam. There's a classic music in Ethiopia. And I didn't know this for many, many years, because growing up in Seattle, Washington, which is where I founded Kronos in 1973. But growing up there and playing in a orchestra, youth orchestra, and then just learning everything I could about music, at that time in the 60s, what was considered to be classical music seemed really fenced in to me. At the same time, I was encountering late Beethoven and Schubert, which to me just opened up an emotional universe that did not know about fences emotionally. But then being the kind of listener that always wanted to sit in the front row from being a teenager, and then also being the youngest person at chamber music concerts when I was a kid, and then just noticing, I just came from my high school class and my high school music room, and I was hearing this cool music from Ghana, and then hearing a famous string quartet only playing, Haydn, Beethoven, and maybe Dvorak, or maybe Debussy, or maybe Bartok. It just seemed like, what? I'm not hearing the whole story here, or even part of the whole story. And then turning on the radio, it turned on the radio in the late 60s, and the kind of stuff that I was able to hear led me to want to make other kinds of connections and other kinds of sounds with my instrument. And then in 1973, in the summer of 73, August, hearing Black Angels by George Crumb on the radio, I just thought, whoa, okay, now I've got my song. It just got, first of all, I had the radio cranked up, and all of a sudden that came on. And it was the closest thing to the opening, Night of the Electric Insects. It was the closest thing to hearing Jimi Hendrix play the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock that I'd ever encountered on a violin or a string group, a quartet. And I thought, great. And this is a response, in my opinion, to the American war in Vietnam. I've got to play this. I got to score, had a look at it. I've got to get a group together that is going to spend the time it takes to dive deeply into this. And that's why I started Kronos, as a way to respond to what our country was involved in and had been involved in. And
I love that framing. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think about, for me, I would say coming home with a bassoon for the first time when I was 12 years old. And I've told this story to many people. I didn't know what this thing was. My parents didn't know what this thing was. I didn't come from a musical family. The first thing that I happened to find when I searched on the internet for bassoon, at least back in those days, I stumbled on the MySpace page of Imani Winds. So, and I heard them playing an arrangement of Piazzolla's Libertango. So, in my mind as a child, I'm like, okay, so this is what bassoon is. This is what this thing is supposed to do. So, like you, it's just that listening experience that really created the framework and the context. And I'm sorry to think about the fact that so many people don't have those experiences. They don't have those contexts. I wonder, for those musicians, what could be alternative points of discovery or curiosity to help us broaden the way that we're thinking about how we can platform chamber music?
I can only talk about how I listen and how I explore. And one thing I do is, first of all, I talk to a lot of composers and musicians. I just came from a meeting with Sabah Aminikia from Iran, and his close friend, a young filmmaker who just immigrated to the United States. Immigrated to the United States. And we're talking about the situation in Iran, the situation in the United States, and why people are so placid. And what Sabah and his friend both said was the people of Iran have passed through a point where they're no longer afraid to die. And nobody has ever said that to me. And they both said that gives a certain freedom, and it gives a certain strength to the art and to the people and to the culture. And you get to my age and it's like, okay, I'm not afraid of anything either, but it's kind of taken a while to get there. And I'm not really answering your question except to say that I think we need to get as accurate of information as we can every day about what's going on. One of my close friends writes for Slate magazine, and I feel like I get accurate information from that magazine. I think it's important to listen to what we're hearing all around us and bring music into the conversation. And when I'm meeting with any composer or musician, I'm interested to know what is it that they're hearing inside? How are they translating what they're hearing inside to a form we can all hear? And I kind of think that's our job as musicians. And, the more I travel down life's highway, the more I think I want as many people as possible, especially the youngest listeners, to be able to have the wealth of musical experience that I've been able to have so far. And I do take it for granted that, this world of music is thrilling, exciting, and you never know what you're going to hear next. And I strongly advise everybody that I encounter, especially, I start with my family, my own family, and try as much as possible to share results of explorations that are challenging or fun and thrilling. And, music, and getting back to what you're saying about the question about classical, music is not owned by any of us. We are so lucky to get to be able to share it for a little while. And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, when I was 16 years old and had my composition teacher, Ken Benshoff, who later wrote the very first piece for Kronos, I remember the day he introduced me to Thelonious Monk.
Wow.
He played a recording of Monk, and I thought, whoa, I've never heard anything quite like that. And about 40 or 45 years later, he and I had a conversation. And I said, Ken, how come it is that Monk, when he plays a minor second, it sounds more dissonant than any other pianist I've known about? Why is that? Is it possible? And Ken is a pianist. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll get some accurate information. Like, how does a pianist make a minor second sound more, kind of like a violinist does? You can play it. You can play it tighter, than a piano. But Monk does that to my ear. And I kept saying, well, is it because one finger is louder than the other? He said no. He denied it was physically possible to do that. What he said was, it's the timing. It's the way Monk uses timing for that dissonance that gives it that flavor and that tension. So I'm really not answering your question now.
Oh, this is fascinating. But before, I want to talk about Three Bones, but you've inspired a thought in me when you talk about, going back to this idea of people not being afraid to die. Of course, not to diminish or trivialize the seriousness of that. But as I relate that to the field of music, especially for those of us who play these orchestral instruments, it makes me think about the freedom to really create what you want, to not feel like you have to live within a Brahms, Haydn, Beethoven sort of bubble. Of course, it also makes me think of how Nina Simone famously defined freedom as being no fear. I wonder if you can speak to that as it relates to the development and the work of the Kronos Quartet over the years. It's clear to me that there's never been a feeling of needing to fit within a box, but rather a freedom that allows you and your group to have created so many different sounds that have, as we were mentioning earlier, as I mentioned earlier, has been a point of discovery for so many of us.
Well, I want to credit the founding fathers of the string quartet first, and Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert. When you think about it, those four guys in about, I would say, 55 years, they created this amazing foundation for the art form that I've loved since I was 12 years old. When I first heard Opus 127 of Beethoven, that was the first string quartet I ever heard. And I carry that E-flat major chord around every minute of my life. And I want to say I also, and I think everybody that plays string quartets has an inner Haydn in them. And I will tell you that my inner Haydn, I can feel a smile happening whenever we do something that has never happened in this art form before. And my inner Haydn loves new things and feels buoyant and alive and ready to jump out and take charge, you know? And so I guess what I want to say is that the benefit of that incredible foundation has been something that Kronos has benefited from. And some people say, well, how can you do some of the things that you've done? How could you play? I remember a famous critic came up to me after we finished Alban Berg's Lyric Suite, and as an encore, we did TV Madness, which is a set of TV tunes from the 50s and 60s. And I said, well, look, for me, the world of music works this way. I mean, we have this experience in a concert, and as you're going home, you turn on your radio and you're going to hear something entirely different. The culture is going to find its way to your inner being one way or another. And TV Madness just kind of did it for you first. And, and concerts are really great things that somehow have developed. I mean, maybe in Haydn's day, they were only for wealthy people in fancy settings and, castles and all that. But now concerts, some of my favorite ones that Kronos has ever played have been in third grade classrooms with the audience about a foot away from us. And, and from there to famous halls and all kinds of settings. But the thing that binds a concert audience is that people are there giving their attention to music. And the experience of doing that with others and is so wonderful. And as a player, and you would know this too, you get the feeling like the listening and the ears and the imaginations of our audiences pull the sound out of us and our instruments.
That's right.
And so, it's so we get this kind of cultural human interchange that it's so beautiful.
Indeed.
I just love it.
Indeed. Yeah. You use the phrase founding fathers. That, of course, makes me think about America at 250, one of the contexts through which Three Bones exists. You also mentioned this idea of listening, which I understand, a conversation about the bones, the three bones in our ears being a part of how this title was born, I'll say. I want to ask you about each of the aspects, the cultural aspects that are explored in Three Bones. But before we get there, I wonder if you could just say a little about this conversation with the poet, Nikki Finney. Like, if you can speak more about how this has become, or how this became sort of a foundational piece in the creation of this work.
Well, for those of you that want to witness an inspiring speech, check out Nikki Finney's acceptance speech for the National Book Award, the Poetry Award. I cannot remember what year she won that award, but I happened to see her and hear her on TV late one night. And I just thought, I love this. I was literally weeping. I was all by myself at 3 a.m. And Nikki just created this amazing performance and speech. And I thought, I've got to be in touch with Nikki Finney. And fast forward years, she wrote a beautiful poem, and Michael Abels wrote a fabulous piece that we performed many times. And after the last time we played at war with ourselves, Nikki and I were having a cup of tea, and this is right during some of the earlier stages of what became Three Bones. And I said, Nikki, let me explain what I hope to accomplish here. And we've got 3 panels, and it's something about listening to what indigenous people have given us in our country. It's listening to what African Americans, especially Gullah people, have given us in our country. And then it's also listening to Chinese American people. Arguably 3 of the most I would say groups that have survived the most intense difficulties that can be heaped on human beings in our country, and somehow have survived and are thriving. And in some ways, some cases are, lifting us all up. So I wanted to make a piece that demonstrated that musically, visually, as many ways as we could. And I was just talking about the process of listening. And then I said, Nikki, I need a title for this. I can't think of anything, Mm-hmm. And she thought for a minute, and then she said, Three Bones. And I said, Nikki, thank you very much. She said, it's my present. So Three Bones is Nikki Finney's present to Kronos.
That's beautiful. And great minds think alike. As I've been thinking about in my own creative work and in my own production work, what's uniquely American. It inspired even in me thoughts of the indigenous experience, the Black experience, and for me, not specifically the Chinese American experience, but the immigrant experience overall as we think about, these things that are foundationally American. And I would love to ask you about how this shows up in each of these 3 panels, beginning with the indigenous engagement in the making of what's been titled Ground. And my engagement with different individuals from various indigenous communities across the country, I've been introduced over the years to this notion of music king. So music in these traditions not being something that is just performed and packaged and sold, but something that's inherently connected to ritual or connected to practice. I wonder if there's ritual or broader practice that you have been able to learn about or engage through the making of Ground as a part of Three Bones.
Yes, and so Three Bones begins with Ground, as you said, and Ground begins with an 1890 recording of a Passamaquoddy salutation song from an Edison cylinder that we heard from the Library of Congress. And the idea of creating layers of time has been really important. And learning, for example, that Charlie Patton, frequently credited as one of the founding fathers of the blues, mm-hmm. was also Native American as well. I think there's a absolute strength in this, and just knowing more. And Link Ray wrote Rumble, and Rumble is the only instrumental recording that ever has been banned from the airwaves in the United States. Well, of course it had to be on ground. It had to be at Link Ray. And Raven Chacon wrote for our 50 for the Future. And when I was speaking with Raven recently, he said, 250, man, we've been here a lot longer.
Oh, yeah.
Millennia longer than that. And so for him, I mean, he's proud to be included, but he also wanted to be sure I knew that in his experience, 250 years is a small fraction of what he has sensed from his upbringing on the Navajo tribe.
That's right.
And so, we learn things as we go, and that's another important thing about musicians is we get to listen and we get to speak to our collaborators on very kind of essential, deeply emotional, and often historical realms. And that's why tyrannical people are afraid of us, by the way, because we're listening. We're listening,
as they should be, should be. And the second panel here at the Sea Islands. This is one that especially caught my attention, not just as an Afro-American individual, but the whole of my dad's side of the family and lineage is from coastal South Carolina. So like the Gullah tradition is one that has been one that I've been, very familiar with all my life. So much so that I grew up thinking of the term Geechee specifically as one that was more derogatory. But I think these days people are using it in a slightly different, more celebratory way. The question that came to mind for me when I thought about at the Sea Islands was this culture, this uniquely American culture being foundational for so many people, and at the same time, a point of discovery for other people. And of course, as we use this word discover, we have to be very careful, in the way that Christopher Columbus didn't discover anything. We have to make sure that audiences understand that they aren't discovering Gullah Geechee culture. I wonder how you engage that conversation as it relates to at the Sea Islands, this idea of uplifting a culture that for some is very familiar, very foundational, and for others, something that they've never engaged before.
Well, how long do we have? Do we have 5 minutes for me to tell the story of how this happened for me and for Kronos? Okay.
Sure.
My wife, Regan, was reading the biography of Henry James. In that biography, he mentioned one of his close friends who was an English actress, famous in the 1840s. And her name was Fanny Kemble. Well, on a tour of the United States, Fanny Kemble fell in love with a plantation owner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They got married, and eventually she went to the plantation. And what she discovered was horrifying to her, and she kept a diary. At the same time, she's bearing children with this guy. Eventually, they split up. She went back to England. And during the American Civil War, her diary was published in London. So in that diary, which Regan also read, there was mention of music and culture and Gullah people.
Mm.
And I had never encountered, I didn't know anything about this. I thought, all right, Regan and I are known for deep rabbit holes, right? And just diving in. And so we did that. And the very first thing I heard and saw was an Alan Lomax video about Gullah people. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't believe I didn't know about this. I couldn't believe it, right? And soon I learned about the work of Lorenzo Dow Turner, the first African-American linguist in our country. He's the one that established that Gullah is a language. Mm-hmm. And you will see at the Sea Islands, you will see Bobby Seale talking about how important that book was in his growth and his understanding of how he and people around him were speaking at the time. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an aside. Sorry, I could talk. Like I say, I could talk about this for hours. But anyway, that's how I started getting in touch with Gullah things. And then I had an appointment as at the Library of Congress as a Kluge scholar in modern culture. And I had decided what I wanted to do was somehow bring the recording that Lorenzo Dow Turner made in 1933 of a song sung by Amelia Dolly. She didn't know what the words meant. She didn't know where the melody came from. She learned it from her mom, who learned it from her mom, and we don't know how far back that went, right? Okay, fast forward, I don't know, maybe 10 years. A linguist from Sierra Leone was visiting Lorenzo, who played this recording, and the linguist from Sierra Leone said, well, that's the Mende language.
Wow, yeah.
Okay, fast forward another 10 years or so, a anthropologist and musicologist were able to take that recording to Sierra Leone and eventually found someone who knew the song, knew that it was passed by mothers to their kids, grandmothers to their granddaughters. It was passed through the women. It was a funeral song. And at that point, then, we were able to learn and know that the Amelia Dolly recording made in 1933 was and is, to my knowledge, the first and only recorded song that survived the Atlantic Passage in its original language. And when you play that song next to the first recording of Kumbaya, which is a Gullah song, you find this connection that is so powerful and so beautiful. That's all I can say about it. It's just incredible. And so anyway, those two early recordings form the centerpiece of At the Sea Islands.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. And maybe, I don't know if at this point you've been able to discover, again, loosely using that word, the 90s children's show Gullah Gullah Island, which many of us watched as children, and, in its own unique way, passed that culture down as much as a child could understand in that own way. So, just things getting passed down is just such a beautiful thing to think about.
It's beautiful. I don't know that show. I should have known about it. And, you know what? It's one good thing is I'm writing it down right now.
Oh,
and
sure.
it's never too late Gullah Gullah Island. Okay.
Yeah,
It's
be sure to check that one out. All the kids who grew up in the '90s, like I did, will definitely remember that show.
that's great. That's fabulous. And you find out all these connections that happen. And I discovered that towards the very end of her life, Mahalia Jackson sang in Charleston. And so, anyway, we're bringing part of our most recent recording, Glorious Mahalia. We're bringing Sometime I Feel Like a Motherless Child. We're bringing that into At the Sea Islands also.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And so, anyway, there's ways to make connections. And
Indeed.
and then, let's go to the third panel very quickly. I know we're probably...
West Coast Sea Islands, because when I think about Beyond the Golden Gate, I've in recent months I've had the pleasure of being able to visit Angel Island in the Bay Area, learning about the unique histories of immigration on the West Coast, and how the music, in a different way but yet a similar way, traveled to those areas, how people brought that music along. I wonder if you can speak to similarities there and how this shows up in Beyond the Golden Gate, this third panel.
Well, first of all, somehow, and it's been so many years, I can't remember how it happened, but I encountered these recordings that were made in San Francisco's Chinatown in, I think it was 1902. And these were recordings of Cantonese opera. Mm. And I just remember thinking, wow, if you were an Anglo in San Francisco in 1902 and you walked by somebody's open door and you heard this kind of music, this kind of singing, it would be something like, you mentioned bassoon, it'd be like The Rite of Spring.
Sure.
I mean, it was so different, it was sonically nothing like anything we might hear from European musicians at that point. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I love that this happened right here, a few miles from my home. This was going on. And anyway, we met Wu Man in 1992 and started performing with her. Eventually, I played those recordings for her. And I just said, someday, Wu Man, we have to figure out a way to bring these recordings into our work. And so those early Edison cylinder recordings do figure in Beyond the Golden Gate. And just several years ago, it was Wu Man that introduced me to the oral historian, David Lay. And David is someone who can teach all of us about some of the pivotal legal cases that have been brought by Chinese Americans to our system that have benefited all of us, in my opinion. Now, some people aren't going to agree with me, but for me, birthright citizenship, which is something that was brought to our legal system right here in San Francisco, is an essential pillar of our country. And so that
it's constitutional.
It's constitutional. Yes, it is. And the Wong Kim Ark case was something that my daughter, who taught third grade in the public schools here for many, many years, came home one day with this book and said, "Dad, you've got to read this book." And I read a third grade book about Wong Kim Ark, and I thought, now, how come I never learned about this? How come I did not know this? And so that sparked what has become Beyond the Golden Gate. And David Lay will be part of explaining that case and other cases. And, you know how it happens, that someone who is not part of the majority in terms of ethnicity, it's so easy for developments, for inventions, for discoveries to be sidelined. It happens every minute of the day. And what I hope that Three Bones can just show just a little bit, and on the stage at Carnegie Hall, which to me is symbolic. It's, there's a lot of concert halls in the United States, but Carnegie Hall is symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was approached, what does Kronos want to do for the 250th year of the United States? I told them exactly what I'd like to do before I knew what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, 3 years ago, well, I want to do a triptych. And I explained the triptych, and it's taken that long to kind of get it all together. But here we are.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, I can't wait for folks to learn more about Three Bones. I imagine at some point there will be a recording for people to engage and listen to after the live performances.
We've definitely, and I've neglected to mention that we have three absolutely essential artists joining us. So in panel number 1, Ground, we have Laura Ortman from the White Mountain Apache tribe, and her close friend, Jeffrey Gibson, has made a fabulous universe class video that accompanies her piece. For panel number 2 at the Sea Islands, we have the essential Gullah percussionist, Quentin Baxter, who lights up every stage he ever walks on. And we've had so much fun. And then on panel number 3, beyond the Golden Gate, Wu Man, who, in my estimation, is the most vivid pipa player I've ever heard, and we've worked together since 1992. So this is a really big moment for us.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, in closing, I'll ask you, one more thing. I think it's really beautiful the ways in which Three Bones is going to teach people more about America, just frankly, that is what this will do. At the same time, we have a lot of institutions and individuals who will, think about the John Philip Sousa version of America, these other aspects that are uniquely American. How do we draw the circle even wider? We have the points of discovery. How do we include some of the stories that people are familiar with in framing a broader America, not an America in which the Gullah is in this corner or the stories of immigrants are in this corner, but all of these things that are uniquely America have equal footing and equal grounding in the musical story we tell about ourselves?
Well, I was asked to write something for the festival, Carnegie Hall Festival. And first of all, I was very surprised they asked me. I'm not a writer, number one. But I was able to look at what many different, I think there are 30 some different performances as part of the U.S. at 250 festival,
mm-hmm.
of which Kronos Three Bones is one. And what I thought is the curation of this festival does tell a larger story about our country's music. And so there's no one group or no one soloist that had to take on everything,
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible to take on everything as much as I want to. It's like, yeah, we're just limited by our time, our energy, let's say our lack of time, our lack
Sure.
of infinite energy and resources. Um, but I think from what I could tell and observe on the festival as a whole, it seemed to me that the various groups were really trying to make something that, as a composite, if you were able to go to everything, which nobody would be, but if you can at least learn a little bit about the various performances of the festival, it does tell quite a story, and that we do have something special to celebrate in this time of war, in this time of immense social disturbance, conflict, and Carnegie Hall itself. I was able to learn a little bit about the history of Carnegie Hall. And I don't know if you know, but the very first concert ever played at Carnegie Hall, Tchaikovsky came over from Russia to conduct his music.
Okay.
And a few years later, Dvorak's New World Symphony was premiered at Carnegie Hall. In the 30s, Benny Goodman played the first mixed interracial performance that on the stage of Carnegie Hall. One of my favorite performers, Billie Holiday, sang Strange Fruit there, not for the first time, but it eventually arrived there. Leonard Bernstein conducted the young people's concerts there. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, all kinds of people have played there. Duke Ellington played there. Nina Simone played there. Mm-hmm. Come on, it's a cool place. And the other thing is, it sounds good there.
That helps.
It helps. It helps. Yeah.
Quartet's 1992 album Pieces of Africa. That's the finale to a work called White Man Sleeps, music by Kevin Bolins featuring the Kronos Quartet. Huge thanks to David for taking the time to speak with me. I'm looking forward to hearing the recordings of Three Bones when they're ready. Hope you got something out of that chat that you can think about as we approach this American anniversary. So, of course, one thing that you almost have to get into when you have a conversation about the engagement of music and cultures from around the world is appreciation versus appropriation. Yes, I know it's so exhausting for many people to get in that, but I think it's very necessary. It's a conversation that's been wrung out many times here on TRILLOQUY, but it's front of mind for me today, not only listening back to my conversation with David, but from a phone call I had today on the topic to protect the guilty. I won't name anyone or any institutions regarding my phone call today, but it's such a delicate balance between platforming a musical culture and taking it for yourself for your own benefit. what I appreciate about the Kronos Quartet is that you can always hear their personal connections to the music at hand. They didn't hear something that they think is cool and replicate it and slap it on an album. They travel to these places. They have conversations. They spend time with the people, and they collaborate in a way that brings community to the sound. I'm also thinking about the work of the South Dakota Symphony, and what they do with Native communities there, and I've had those folks. Shout out to Delta David Geyer on the Triloquy podcast. The music for them is the result of community, the result of conversation. And I think there's such a difference there. If I can continue to think about examples, there's a percussionist in my Buddhist community here in New York, who's done the same thing. She's a Native woman who spent almost 20 years traveling to Ghana, to Northwest Ghana, to learn more and earn her stripes as it relates to an instrument called the gil. It's a member of the balafon family of instruments. Even for myself, I started a journey with the bansuri about a year ago, and with Indian classical music, generally speaking, both Carnatic and Hindustani. And I can't wait to dive into it more with a teacher who can help me realize my fascination and my affinity in an equitable way, and in a way that isn't appropriating culture. I share all of this to say that as we inch further and further away from 2020, I think there's a greater lack of engagement when it comes to the so-called woke side of these conversations. When you're presenting music of a community or to a community, I think we have to always think about the human connections that brought it to the front, or maybe the lack of human connections that brought it to the front. Do you really know what you're doing? Is there a respect of the history that this music and this culture lives in? I think those are important questions to consider. It's easy for us to take a sound or a general aesthetic and do something with it that suits our immediate needs or our immediate desires, thanks to the continued growth of digital media, YouTube, and all of those things. But for me, this is an opportunity for us to engage with each other. I don't think that it can't be done equitably, because a lot of people do it equitably, with the Kronos Quartet being a prime example. But even when it comes to what I wear on a daily basis, it goes even beyond music. My very Afrocentric fashion, my Afrocentric way of presenting, it comes from guidance. It comes from conversation and community. I'm fully prepared to talk about the man from Senegal who makes most of my clothing, what the different symbols mean, all of that. And it's not that we have to be prepared to be policed or called out, as much as I think we have an opportunity to deepen our own perspectives and make human connections that result in beautiful music, that result in beautiful performances, or really fashionable clothing. Shout out to Falu over at the Shabazz Market here in New York. So just thought I would mention that, say that again. There's a lot on my spirit that I won't share for professional reasons, but as you listen to the Kronos Quartet and engage their work, I hope that you will consider the amount of just cultural work that they do as an organization that results in the music that they present, and see what that looks like in your own life and your own creativity. Thanks again for always listening and supporting the show. You can hear past opuses and donate to the project at TRILLOQUY.org, TRILLOQUY.org. I'll have another one of these for you soon, but until then, make a human connection today. It'll be good for you. Peace.